Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Audit and Transparency Committee. I'm Councillor Joe Hargreaves, I'm Chair, and I will be chairing tonight's meeting. The event is being streamed live on YouTube, and members of the public and the media are welcome to watch the meeting remotely and to listen to the discussions taking place. I'd like to welcome everybody to Committee Room 1. We have a number of visitors this evening who will be joining for certain items of the agenda. I'd also like to welcome Tara Usher, our new co-opted member, who will be joining us at the next meeting as her appointment has got to be ratified for the full council meeting tomorrow evening. But do please, if you feel you want to join the conversation and discussion, please do. And we look forward to having you on the committee. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Before we proceed with the meeting, I would like to ask members of the committee, please make sure their mobiles are turned off or silent or something that we won't hear them. And I think it will be appropriate for us to start with 72 seconds silence to remember those who lost their lives in the event of tragedy. Thank you. Please join me in 72 seconds. Thank you. Item number 1, apologies for absence. Apologies. Thank you very much. Item number 2, declaration of interest. Any members have an interest to declare? Thank you. Item 3, minutes of the previous meeting. These minutes of the previous meeting have been circulated. Do the committee agree to sign them as a correct record?
You draft your comments.
Okay. So would you like to, Liz, do you want to, I know you sent them, but do you want to share them with the committee?
On page 7, we talk about scrutiny committees. I thought there was only one oversight and scrutiny committee. Page 8, it states the limitation on external audit is materiality at a lower level. I thought materiality for external audit at a higher level it means that we do as much testing. And Denco's comments on page 8 do not appear in the action tracker.
Okay, so we can get those into the action tracker. Thank you very much.
To page 6, the third bullet point from the bottom. I had thought my question, there were 6-month meetings, and then my question was about a deep dive into an issue and how did you have the rapid response. I don't think that answer quite picks up the deep dive issue and whether it's actually about 6 monthly meetings and that the chief executive has regular meetings. Anyway, I need to look up my own comments, which I haven't been able to find, but I didn't think that was correct. That paragraph didn't actually reflect.
So how would you like it? How would you like it amended?
I can probably send you a suggestion, but essentially it was along the lines of my question was how does the chief executive and the team respond to an emerging or fast issue, and I think the response came back that they had 6 monthly meetings and then they were also at the executive level. And I don't think that second article.
Chair, if I may, so there are meetings of risk and control every 2 months, every 6 months the risk register will be formally considered. In between times, emerging more urgent issues can be picked up at those bi-monthly meetings. So that it's not a matter of waiting the 6 months, it is a matter of each meeting and new issues can be picked up. Formal review of the registers every 6 months.
And I didn't think that 2 months meeting session was in the response.
Okay, so you want that, just that paragraph clarifying with that, okay?
And then page 10, the very last business point. The chief executive also said the question of collection of freedom bills was up in the air.
Which page was that?
Page 10. I don't recall that from the evening, but I certainly can't imagine it would have left a formal response.
We can go back into the recording and see what the actual wording was and put that in.
Thank you.
Okay. So we'll make those amendments and bring them back to the next meeting for signature. So I have another set of minutes from the 6th of March. We had some amendments in. We've now amended those. So as a committee, happy for you to sign those. Thank you. Thank you very much. So we now move to item 4, internal audit review of the administration of business improvement district bids. Who is going to present that?
Start, Chair, and come down as colleagues. So as you'll remember at the last meeting, we had the head of internal audit annual report, which identified the reviews carried out during the year, which included a limited assurance review of the administration of business districts. That report contained a summary of the issues and the actions that have been taken by management. The committee, I think, were quite keen to have an opportunity to discuss in a bit more detail at this meeting the findings of that review and to also understand the steps that have been taken to address the issues identified in the review. So we've reproduced in 2.4 the summary that was in the head of internal annual report last time. And then obviously what we're doing as internal auditors, we'll be following up in due course on these actions because they were agreed to be implemented by July. Colleagues here, so Sophie Evans here on the billing side, we had asked Sue Harris.
Yes.
Unfortunately, she's not here and not able to attend. So again, happy for the committee to direct any questions. We can take any we can't.
You don't dwell into anything to that, or just see if there are any questions. Okay. Committee, any questions on this paper, please? Councillor Gardner.
Yes. 2.4.6 on page 17. The service level agreement wasn't in place with Silica. So the first one is 2021. So I wanted to know why wasn't it done and when was it done?
So that actually is Sue Harris's area. I'm afraid, I'm sorry. But you're quite correct. So we started the first bid mid-year with 21.
And then the baseline agreement for the Brompton, the Knightsbridge partnership, was a draft version. Does that mean that the other two are formally in place?
We'll check that, Moira.
I'll just look at the office.
Okay, we'll check that for you.
I think a lot of this reflects the newness of the bids and the sort of settling down. And it would be good to maybe perhaps have some more questions now, but to revisit this in a year or so when we've had a proper full cycle of reflecting and we can have a better view. But any other questions on this at the moment?
Yeah, I just wondered how long overdue these unpaid levies in the second bullet?
Yeah. So I can tell you where we are for the current phase, which is that the business rates team in my area have now taken over responsibility from Civica for billing, recovery and enforcement. There is still some levy outstanding for the first 6 months of the first bid. And the other 2 bids have been up 2 years now. This is year. And there is, I mean, I've got the figures, I can provide you with searching for them now. So there is some levy outstanding for both of the other bids, all 3 bids from last year. But for the first time now, we've started billing. So we issued our first bills in May. each of the bid areas, and our first reminders will go out at the end of this month, and that will then trigger the entire process that goes through to 2 reminders being sent, then a court summons, then the case being taken to court should the bid want to take such aggressive recovery approach. So thankfully we're now in a position where we actually are starting to recovery for the bids. I met with them today. I think they're quite relieved to hear about that, but we have got some work to do to catch up with previous years. So we're working on that alongside.
Thank you.
Have we got better with the latter bids?
Well, all 3 bids were implicated in this. They kind of came in quick succession. I think we're getting better with all 3 bids, but I don't think we saw an improvement in the 3 that were being developed in quick succession. But this second year now, or third year for Brompton, we are seeing an improvement in that. There is a recovery now in place. We're developing procedures and protocols that we can share with them that they agree. We're checking with them regularly on who are the bid levy payers, etc. So I think we're starting to see an improvement, but I don't think they would have seen that at the point at which they were initiating each of the bids.
And then all the recommendations are expected to be implemented by July, and midway through July. Where are we on that?
So on the ones that I'm responsible for, I can confirm that they're all in hand and that they will be implemented or have been implemented already. Some of the others are outside of my control, and it would be for Sue to confirm. But she does convene a group of officers that she oversees it, so I'm sure she could give a prompt update on exactly where she is and each of the actions. But I can confirm in terms of the billing, they're all in place within that timescale.
I wanted to ask again on page 17, and I suppose this maybe slightly relates to the answer to the previous question. On the 3rd bullet point, where there wasn't an overarching procedure document to guide the bids operations, is that now in place?
Sorry, that's in Sue's area.
That's also Sue's area. So we're going to talk back to that. And then the only other one was a general question on page 18, looking at some of those risks identified. Do we know, has it been a learning curve, or have we identified any reasons why, for instance, there wasn't more?
I think the monitoring group soon to answer. I can answer the other 2 for it. So we have found in the system that we took over from Civica when we took over the billing, that there was some of the parameters within the system for that billing had not been set up properly. So it's a bit like one of those machines where you press and throws out invoices, and if you haven't got all the parameters, it might apply. So we've been rectifying those, and we've been having to they went out this year to make sure that we're not caught out by any errors that we haven't seen yet. We are required under the operating agreement to provide on the 2nd bullet a monthly report to the bids to tell them how many invoices have been paid, how many haven't been paid, as well as where we are starting to send reminders or take recovery action. So what the audit identified was that in that month, well, first of all, the monthly report wasn't being produced. I'll do that on the 10th of each month, reminding them today that they're receiving it. What it hasn't provided until now, of course, is the requirement of any recovery reminders, summons. Of course, now we're going into that process, we'll be able to add that, so we'll meet that requirement. We are meeting the requirements of the operating agreement now, but the bids have said we would like some amendments and improvements to that, so we'll take that.
Thank you.
Andrew?
I just general point. I wasn't here at last meeting. Probably Mike might be the one to answer this. So, having seen the report and the bearing down the way by this committee on the exceptions report, would you do it the same way again? And if you wouldn't do it the same way again, what are the main lessons learned from it? Because this is a new initiative, and there's a balance to be struck, isn't there? Overpowering the new initiative with all the controls and procedures that are more mature part of the council's act. Anyway, over question.
Well, I mean, I think it has been a learning experience, and so I don't suppose we would do it the same way again. I mean, Westminster, it's been pointed out, do it considerably better, but I think they've had 7 years doing it, is it? So I think it has been a learning experience, and the audit was very useful, I think, in pointing out all the deficiencies in the way it was done. I think it has been key to transfer the billing part to the business rates team, to Sophie's team, and that is bringing about a lot of improvement in that. But I mean, it can't happen overnight. But if any other bids come on, I think we're much better set to do them because of the learning that's taken place with this, and that the audit has also identified.
The question I was really going to follow up on is, if a new bid came in, I think you just answered, if a new bid came on now, a year, 2 years down the line of that bid, we wouldn't be reading these same things because we've actually.
No. So as a result of this audit, we've developed a document and Sue's teams that sets out roles and responsibilities, not just in terms of in any new bid, in the event of any new bid being, we know there are bids coming along, so that we're very clear about who needs to be involved. And we've also put in there some SLAs and timescales so that we know how far our critical paths would be for life period. So I think, as Mike says, it's valuable learning that we wouldn't do it the same again. That document is there now in place to make sure.
Any issues about the amount of resource that was given for this at the early stage? Picking up really Anna's comment, I think you said quite pointedly 2021 something was seen to be wrong, and we haven't quite closed off 3 years later. Is there something about the amount of resource put to this, or?
Yeah, well, I would say probably insufficient resource was put to it. There was over reliance on Civica, and they weren't very well commissioned, I suppose, and that the audit kind of makes that clear. So, and as you know, as we experience everywhere, contractors do what you tell them to do, and no more. So, I think that led to the problems that have been outlined, and it could have been, it probably should have been the business rates team from the start, but with additional resource put in. I mean, the business rates team, Sophie's team, was dealing with a lot of COVID stuff when they started, which was a problem. I'm not saying that caused this, but we would have had to have brought in quite a lot of extra resource into Sophie's team to do that at the time, but we didn't. We used Civica, and it hasn't worked out there. And, we probably also, I mean, Sue would need to give the answer on that, but probably did also need more resource in E&C to deliver it, I would think.
Yeah, they have now got a dedicated in E&C. I think they may have had to do them now, but I think there were some in recruiting. But that role was that probably.
Okay, well, yeah, the team hopes that there is some learning and reflection on the next case, go into it and have some critical report.
And been this committee's role in this has been great. Just tell me, out of interest, if a member of the bid goes under, does the person taking on that property, because a lot of the properties are single landlord, single freehold properties, but not so much in the King's Road, but maybe one in the other places. What happens when a member goes bust?
So the bid is set up so that you are charged effectively per day through the year for the amount of time that you operate as a business from that building. And so we are looking always for people who are coming and in and moving out. You're moving out, your invoice will be adjusted, and you will be only invoiced for the period of time that you were in that location. And if you're moving in, you'll have an adjusted bill for the.
And the business movement can choose whether to join the bid or not.
No, not after the ballot. So the ballot is the only point at which businesses within the bid area express their opinion, and it goes in favour of the majority. So you may well have members of the bid who are expected to pay a levy, that actually voted no, but they still are required to contribute under the bid regulations.
Right. And that's applied to new business moving.
Yeah, and it would be up to the bid themselves. If the small business was struggling to pay, how much latitude they were going to give. We would liaise with them to say, how aggressive do you want to be in recovery of this debt? And they would make judgments based on their relationships with this in that area and whether they could recover actually some of that money.
Can I just ask, if a property is allowed business rates relief, do they get bid relief?
No, business rates relief is quite rare, which is why it was so difficult for the team to accommodate COVID when we suddenly had a lot of legislation providing relief. There are, within the operating agreement, there are a number of variations to the standard fee. There's a cap on the amount you can charge any one business because it's a proportion of their business rates. I know in one of them is £50,000, but I can't. So there's a cap on that that would vary the amount. And also charities are exempt and listed buildings are exempt. So there are a number of exemptions that are set out in the operating agreement, but we've not come across a situation yet where there would be any relief. Hope we never get into a COVID situation, but it would be interesting what that would, trigger.
Okay, well, thank you for those questions. I think that was a really useful exercise and good work by the committee, and thank you for your response on that. So thank you very much. So we now move on to item number 5, value for money report. Each year the council statement of accounts is subject to external audit. This includes a review to determine if the accounts give a true and fair view of the council's income and expenditure for the previous year. Advice from money opinion for 2016, 17, 2018 was not issued by KPMG. External audit at the time also had a report, financial report, ongoing public inquiry and police investigations. So we now have an update on that. And Mike, are you going to give us the update, please?
Yeah, just briefly, because obviously it is historic and it is all that there in the report. We didn't have a value for money opinion made by our external auditors after the tragedy, after the Grenfell tragedy, because they felt they weren't able to give one, and that was our previous external auditor, KPMG. We got that last year. It was an adverse opinion for 2016-17 and 2017-18, which they concluded by looking at the evidence and particularly our own statements of the public inquiry. That's enabled Grant Thornton to look at the opinion for 2018-19 and 2019-20, which they've now concluded, and which is attached to this report, and they've given an adverse opinion for the first year of those 2018-19, and then a except for opinion for the following year. But it's all based on what the position was at the time, as opposed to what it is now, obviously, and that now enables us to complete the audits for those years.
And just to add, Chair, the work done by Grant Thornton Building and KPMG found in their reports to the committee previously. So what we've done, and Doug Goldring's here to pick up any questions the committee has on the particular issue around fire door replacement programme.
Yeah.
That was a key feature in the 18-19 and 19-20 conclusions that have been drawn, but helpful for Doug to be here. Give an update. There was an update to the report, but actually questions on the update.
Welcome, Doug. See you again.
Doug Goldring, Director of Housing Management.
Do you want to do an update on that, or do you want to wait for questions?
There is an update in the report. I can give a quick summary.
Just give a quick summary, please.
We're at the stage now where we've placed 4,000 fire doors. We're now on our third contract. There's quite a lot of history to fire doors. initially the fire doors that we'd inherited, lots of them had to be replaced because they failed the fire test. So it's really important to get the quality right to make sure that what you're putting in is actually going to go to the right type. So we've had to do quite a lot of that. We had COVID, which delayed things a little bit. But we've done all our properties almost. There's a few exceptions where I have difficulty getting in because some people don't want us in, and there are various reasons for that, which then have to go through a legal process. But we, coupled with that, we've done properties over 11 metres. So it's the smaller properties that are left, where, of course, we carry out regular fire risk assessments. So if there is a door that doesn't look like the original door and has been changed, we will deal with that under a different process for a revenue contractor that we use to deal with that, so we can minimise risk. And we also now have a regular check, which we have to do under the changing the fire regulations, to check every year that contractors.
It's quite like a fall through and brief. Is it by the time you finish it?
No,
These will now stay for a number of years.
Yes, it will complete. You've got to remember that the ones that are left, by and large, it's the original doors that were put in maybe 50 years ago, but they were reasonable quality. But you can't be 100% sure without taking it off its hinges, taking it away, and establishing what it's actually made of and what's inside it. But by and large, these are fully wooden doors that we have. We just don't know what they are. We are having to replace them to bring them up to the right standard. So that's what we're doing, and we're almost, well, we're 2/3 of the way, 70% of the way through.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for doing this. I mean, I suppose when I went through this, one of the concerns I had was that there's a lot of focus on fire doors. I live in a mansion block that's over the height, so we're wrestling with this all at present. But on the Adair Tower issue, that was largely self-closures, and that doesn't appear to have been addressed. And whereas the audit opinion for 1920 only refers to fire doors, it doesn't refer to the closures. And I just think it's very important to be clear on this. Because people talk about door sets, they talk about fire doors, they talk about closures. I think we just need to be clear as to what there is. And also, the opinion for 2021 said no significant weaknesses. But para 4.7 sets out, since the briefing note of December 22, we've now completed ex-fire door installations, but phase 3 is still to be undertaken. So I'm not sure how we can say no significant. Also, in 4.10, phase 2 covers all high-rise blocks, but 149 of the door sets remain outstanding, and there are issues with access. So that's an issue. And also in 4.12, on self-closures, we have 2,899 have been completed, but they don't match the number of fire doors at 4,020. A fire door is not going to be any good unless it self-closes. Be left open and the fire will just spread.
I can just say on the audit first of all, and then don't come in on the detail. And I don't know if Paul wants to comment. I mean, 2021 obviously had been done at the time of the audit, and is done on a different basis. So I suppose we had moved on, but it was done on a different basis anyway. So this report is really about the 2 previous years and the position as was then. And what I didn't say very well in the beginning was that the except for is because of the fire doors. That was the main except for. So
okay, so it's not a complete
here. So it's a nearly
okay.
Yeah, it's quite confusing because the code changed, as you were saying. So 2021 is a completely different approach. So prior to that, so 18, 19, 19, 20, and the other years KPMG covered, the auditor is required to give a binary yes, no around the value for money opinion. So we've had to go back retrospectively and complete the work based on a methodology that's no longer actually applied. So that's what we have done. So yeah, 1819 was adverse, and then 1920 was to demonstrate the improvement in arrangements and the fact that some of the processes were embedding. 2021, where we've already done the work and reported to this committee, I think in March 22, is around the code requires commentary around arrangements. There's no yes or no. So based on that methodology, I think we were satisfied on where you got to that it was reasonable to say that there was no significant weaknesses. So unfortunately, we're not comparing like to like in terms of what the external auditor is giving you. It says different, yeah, but equally you can't just have those years left open and you can't apply the methodology retrospectively. So this is a way of closing out the year to allow us to give a certificate. So I think there's two elements to your questions. There's the audit approach bit, which is one, and then I guess the questions that you're asking specifically around fire doors, which are, and the other questions which are slightly different are more. Yeah. So.
Do you want to ask anything on that, or to see what do you want to talk about? Because I know this has been a huge issue, hasn't it?
So the 4,000 that we've done all include door closures, and we put our door closures on the outside so that we can see that they're there. So if they get removed, caretaker will pick that up. But we also carry out checks, and the difference in the numbers of the checks that have been carried out is they run a year behind the door close. So you put the door closure in, you wouldn't come back for another year. Now the 149, I did try and explain some of the difficulties that we've had. So you've got some people who are really vulnerable, who may be in hospital, or they might have a care worker or a key worker that needs to so not everyone universally wants these doors. By and large, they're really popular, but there are still a group of people that don't want these doors, and we try to work with them. But we have got some cases that we've been taking to court. It's just before court, so we don't know actually. Give us an order to get in because we haven't been able to test it, because each time we've got that close, they've allowed us in and we've fitted the door. So we're working through those, and the phase 3 is really about the lower risk doors. We've done the high, so all our higher doors, all the other Midlands floors have fire doors with closures on. So that's where we get that.
Actually, say a fire door without the closures is not effective, but not as effective.
If it's closed, it will work. But if they're open, then of course it won't.
Yes, yeah. Okay, thanks. Any other questions, Councillor Gardner?
I actually wanted to ask about on an audit basis, what happens now? So we have the report. Are there any penalties? Is there any action required? Do you need to go back and amend the report, or is this essentially a sort of yes, you have now got the big checks?
So after this meeting is finished and the item has been received, what we would do is we would issue a certificate, which you would publish on your website, which basically reports that that audit year is closed. The impact of that is less significant as it used to be. Previously, for example, electors were able to answer questions on the accounts and raise objections up until the point that a certificate was issued. So if you had previous years open, there was a risk that people could go and ask questions, then you would still have to legally respond to it. The regulations have changed now, so actually they've only got a set window to do that. So there's less really a point of admin in terms of closing the audit. They're closed. So that would be the next action that we would issue. Publishing.
You don't have to refer to that in the current accounts that these are just subsequently been issued. Because otherwise somebody's got to be actively looking, check that the previous accounts have been closed. So wondering how you make it public that they're actually so visible public as opposed to it just appearing.
Yeah, well, so if they were looking at your 22-23 accounts, for example, they would see that and when they're audited, or your 21-22, you would see that the auditor wouldn't issue the certificate because they would say that there were prior years open. So it would there are a number of ways where they could pick that up, but that would be one.
So if we note this tonight, then that gives us a clean bill of health from the audit point of view, doesn't it, for those years.
Yes, so then we can close those.
Mike, did you want to add anything to that, or?
No,
Okay. What you were nodding to me as you wanted to say no. Yeah, any.
Well, I've just got one
Yeah,
other observation. So your opinion is, I use this word loosely, qualified as in words that describe cannot be concluded upon as effective in achieving value for money. I'm just thinking of safety.
Yeah.
And I just wondered that maybe that's what you do in your terms of reference. I just was going to raise the question, how are we sort of keeping a proper sort of focus on the safety aspect? Every time I come across this type of issue, it's about safety, not about money.
Effective as well, isn't it?
So-
Efficiency.
So how do we get that reporting? How's that done within?
As I say, I sit on, along with
Hmm.
Claire, we both sit on the Housing and Community Secretary, and fire reports do come up in terms of the works and the fire doors. So this isn't the only committee in which take away from the question.
Yeah.
Sheet and
I mean, or maybe it makes, but maybe I think it because it is value for money in a very broad sense. It isn't in a sense of it isn't in a narrow sense of did we pay the right amount for something. It is in this broad sense of are we keeping people safe? Are our procedures adequate and so safety is part of the judgment in a sense. That's why it was adverse for the first year.
And specifically that under that old methodology, there was a criteria around, are there any regulators that have made any notices or any regulatory overview or things outstanding? So that's where the angle is coming from. That's why this fits into a value for money.
Yeah, because it's.
Just a minute, it is slightly.
It's quite nuanced.
Yeah, like what I ended up reading is that if the doors weren't safe, they wouldn't be value for money, because they wouldn't be doing their job.
Because it's efficiency, effectiveness, and economy. You know,
Yes,
that's what it's effectiveness.
So I was reassured that it was a value for money because the doors are safe.
Yeah, one thought came to me, that's your comment you made. What was the impact of having this qualification on this report from the auditors? And just if I was a resident and looking at this, I wouldn't quickly, if I was reading this quickly, I wouldn't be sure I'd get from a value to money to safety, which I can understand. I know the way you're going to argue it, and I was then just reminding myself and ourselves that the key thing I think about. So,
And is there a note we could put in anywhere just literally another sentence, if you like, just to reassure anybody who was looking at it? Because again, value for money is a very financial term, isn't it?
yes.
And this is a very safety project. Doug?
I mean, the approach has been a one way of health and safety.
Yes,
That's
yeah,
why you
yeah.
take your high risk buildings first, and that's why you
Yeah.
deprioritise your low risk. But we've done the high risk.
I suspect when this value for money approach was devised, the intention wasn't that it would capture things like this.
Yeah.
It's probably an unintended consequence that this has been caught up in value for money work. I would question why it should fit in the remit specific way it does, but because as you're right, it just focuses on money, and this is
It's money plus. It's not money, but it's more than that. Cindy, you wanted to ask a question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Paragraph 4.8, this is a question in relation to sort of speed and monitoring and much the residents I spoke to. I'm looking at the phase 3 contract here for the 2,300. I'm just trying to understand a bit more of this girder contract in a bit more detail. It seems to say that in the first line, the contract commenced in March 2003. and 400 door sets have been surveyed. So that's approximately 95 days until the 17th of July. So it's about 4.2 a day. And just trying to understand from that, you've got 2,300. What is the contract saying about how quickly the doors are being surveyed? Because the last sentence says Gerda have committed to increasing the volume, but we've got no sense of how many per day and when that target deadline date will be. Because if you've only done 400 in 95 odd days, that looks like 4.2 a day. And I'm not entirely sure that that is fast enough for the residents that are in those properties. Because it's taking an awful long time to get to 2,300. Need a bit more clarity there.
Yeah, sure. So they have 2 years to complete it in, which is 2 years. That's somewhere in the report. Yeah, it takes 2 years to complete in the report.
So both the survey and the installation.
Yeah, so that's it. Oh, sorry, yes, not just the survey. So and they have been finishing off phase 2, and we will be in a position to. They have to then up their game to make sure they hit rules.
So you're sufficiently happy that they will be able to get the manpower to, as you describe it, up their game to be able to fulfil this contract?
Yes, absolutely. The previous contract they delivered on, so I have no doubt. I mean, we're not. Of course, there's lots of people procuring and delivering fire doors at the moment. So there have been certainly supply issues in the past. History of fire doors is quite well known, but we feel that we've got a contract and we expect them to deliver to it. Yes, absolutely.
Well, in that case, then, is it going to be possible for you to give us updates on what Gerda are doing under this contract? 2,300 seems like a rather large number, and I'm a bit concerned, as I was when I spoke to some residents, that we don't know how many doors get installed, but we know that 2,300 is the target there in phase 3.
We don't know how many doors have been installed in total.
In phase 3?
No, not in phase 3.
No,
It takes a number of months.
So you're talking about an update in the future. Yes. Future update on the phase 3 only. I'm focusing specifically on phase 3.
I think the risk management reporting we can provide that. Okay. And I think, Doug did say earlier that actually phase 3 is the lower risk doors as well. So it's been a risk-based approach, which is important.
So the reason you have to measure them absolutely perfectly so that they fit perfectly. So there is a manufacturing process that then happens, and that takes enough. Fitter on site that will then fit the doors in you're doing a state at the top. So I don't know the exact details of when they're due, but it's pretty soon the first order should.
If that can be reported to us, that'd be fantastic. I know that the housing committee may detail.
I'll work with Doug to make sure.
Do you wish to? Thank you.
Please. On page 21, 3.2, we're talking about a risk-based review of the council's value for money arrangement. And I obviously was not on the committee when those reviews were submitted, but I'm just wondering, has the risk area of liabilities or potential liabilities arising from the neglect of the immediate community being included? I'm referring to the Grenfell recovery strategy and the decision making around.
Whether that directly forms part of this, Mike, if you want to.
Pardon?
Yeah.
Well, we have liabilities. We have liabilities around civil claims.
Yes. Yeah.
And we have an unknown entity there around potential future civil claims. In terms of value for money, because those civil claims have to be paid from somewhere, and it's unlikely it's all going to be recovered, even in the event that some of it could be from the other defendants. We have a situation. We have a responsibility, in fact, a legal responsibility to deliver value for money for residents. And we have a situation where not only have the immediate community and North Kensington being effectively paying through their council tax for a large amount of the cost that rose from Grenfell, we also have a potential situation where they may also be expected to pay for the compensation of some people, but not the majority. That shouldn't be coming from residents. And we also have the situation of potential harms arising to particularly the immediate community as a result of flaws within the Grenfell recovery strategy, which came about by a decision-making process which. So I'm just wondering, potentially there's a liability there, and has that been included in the risk register?
So the compensation question, the amount of the compensation is included in the accounts elsewhere. It's been a contingent liability for a number of years, and will now become a provision, and then it will become an actual payment. So that's, I think, in a sense, outside of the value for money judgment. But the value for money judgment has, I mean, it has, the reason it was adverse in the first place is because of what happened, and the fact that, I mean, more that obviously the fact that people lost their lives, and and than the compensation that has to be paid as a result. But all of that, I think, is effectively incorporated in the 3 adverse judgments that were made, the 2 by KPMG, and then the further one by Grant Thornton. So in that sense, it absolutely has been included for the relevant years. The arrangements of the authority were not adequate in terms of value for money because of the tragedy that occurred and the consequences of that.
And the reasons why those adverse came or the acceptable seem to me, looking at this, to be to do with the TMO largely, position from the TMO and around housing. Nowhere are we really looking at the impacts of Grenfell recovery or the lack thereof and the lives that have been lost within that.
On the strategic risk register, is around the health and well-being of those affected by the Grenfell tragedy.
There is.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's one element. Part of the ongoing work around civil claims, obviously we're working closely with government in terms of capitalisation direction to be able to borrow the fund to be able to make the civil claims, which is the right thing to do rather than putting people through the court processes. We are working on a recovery strategy to be able to recover costs, to be able to cover what we're seeking to capitalise. So I think we have a reasonable degree of confidence that we should be able to do that.
Briefly the other day, when I asked the question, the answer came that it is likely that is going to recover that whole cost, and therefore it is unavoidable. Investments will be paid for that, whether through reduction in services or through.
Wasn't at that briefing.
No.
So based on the information that I have, we are seeking to recover.
Yeah. So there's a risk.
There is a risk. And the other element I was going to add is around the restorative justice process that's been agreed through the global settlement. Very much looking at how we have independent, external challenge and oversight of the service provided to bereavement survivors going forward, which I think is really important.
Absolutely, and this is really welcome. And that global settlement is in fact for the immediate community, the recovery of the immediate community as well as bereavement survivors. There are members of the immediate community within the 900 who have entered into that settlement. The vast majority, plus, have not entered into any such settlement. And this restorative justice is not represented in forms.
So I understand it. The consultation that will take place, the oversight of the independent partner will consult with all residents. It isn't just the benefits of those who are.
Okay, can you what you say is crucially important. I want to make sure in context of this paper.
Exactly right.
Where does it sit in this context? Yeah.
We're talking about risks and value for money for residents.
Yes. Well, value for money. Yeah.
So where you are taking untoward risks, say hypothetically, then potentially you are risking value for money. Because, for instance, where a risk was taken with Grenfell, costs following from that lapse of safety are immense, and they are immense beyond the believed.
You're saying that is covered in the risk register.
Yes, that's what I wanted to know.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
And then just one more very quick little question, which may be answered elsewhere. Do we know why KPMG changed their mind?
on.
On being able to give an opinion on value for money, because they couldn't because of the outstanding piece and investigation and inquiry, and then now they decided they can, which is enabled grant Gordon to do.
Well, I think they decided they were able to come up with a judgment, which was an adverse judgment, because of the information that went to the inquiry, and because of the amount of time that had passed, because they were, I think, initially waiting, but so much time had passed, it made sense to come to a judgment, and that's what they did. They took the evidence that had gone to the inquiry, our statements, the authority's statements to the inquiry, and were able to come to that judgment of adverse. So.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the committee is asked to note that, and then as Paul has outlined, the necessary issues can be dealt with to close those accounts down. So thank you very much. Can we now then move on to item number 6, please, the external audit plan? And Paul,
There are 2 papers here, so there's plan for the.
we met Paul last time. Just welcome to the committee again.
Thank you.
We're going to get to know you very well, aren't we, over the next
Yes.
3 months?
Yeah, so we've got 2 papers here. I'll take them both as read. In terms of the highlights, to draw to your attention, to flag that we've used the word indicative on the front of the plan. The reason for that is, as I mentioned at the last meeting, is we're still unclear whether or not there might be some direction from regulators on whether or not the auditors are able to do slightly less work for 22-23 to help catch up with some of the backlogs within the sector. That hasn't been forthcoming between the last meeting and this meeting, so we've prepared this plan so as to not delay us on our work, and it's obviously then with the assumptions that the work we will do is as communicated here and is consistent with previous years. If that changes, we will obviously let you know. So with that basis, our approach is very much based on focusing on the areas of what we would describe as significant audit risks, and they are explained in the plan, and they're the areas where we do most of our work. So they are things that if you've seen previous reports that we've issued, they're consistent with those. So they're either things that areas we're required to look at under auditing standards, and are required to be looked at any audit, be it a government or a commercial entity. Then there are those areas where there is a big number and a degree of estimation, which means there is complexity in how those numbers are derived at. So, for example, around the valuation of land and buildings and pension fund liability or assets. The one that's slightly unique is obviously around the completeness of the provision, making contingent liability disclosures that you've made. But again, that is consistent with the previous year. So in terms of our audit and the code and the various requirements we're meant to audit to, there's been no changes in terms of what you're disclosing in your accounts. So the accounts that you've got later on look pretty similar to accounts that you presented in the previous year, as is our audit approach. So I'm happy to take questions of the 2 plans. Otherwise, it's for approval by the committee. Only thing just to flag is 21. We're obviously doing 22-23 work, but 21-22 is not signed off yet. The work is complete and it has been for a long time. We're just obviously waiting for the capitalisation direction, and once that's been confirmed either way, and the accounting has been updated to reflect that, we'll be able to sign that year off. It will obviously mean that we can't sign off on 22-23, but our intention is to do all of the work.
When are we expecting that directive?
Before that happens, we have to have a financial review undertaken by SIPFA, and it seems to have taken DLUC quite a long while to commission that or get going with that review because and that's just started. So
You said we, you mean the council?
We, the council,
Yeah, the council, right.
sorry, have to have this review, but they have now appointed the people reviewing. Lisa met with them today. I think I met with them on Friday or Thursday last week. So they're getting going on that work, and we've stressed we really like them to get that done as quickly as possible because we did ask for capitalisation in January. So it's been it's taken them a long while.
I think are they having to do every council or just?
They're doing other councils. They're not doing every. They're only doing councils who are asking for capitalisation or other forms of financial support. Most of whom, because they're in financial difficulties. We're obviously not in financial difficulties, but we want the money for a specific purpose to pay the compensation. There's us and one other authority in that position, but most of the people they're dealing with, and I think they are prioritising, to be honest, are the councils that you hear about, like Woking and Thurrock and so forth. So they're also having reviews and asking for.
Sorry, I interrupted you mid-flow.
No, that's, I mean, we'll just do our work on everything other than that. And then obviously once we're in a position, close out the audits will do so. So it means we can't sign, but we're still doing work in the background. So.
A few questions. First observation for audit plans. If I'm waiting to share, this is very comprehensive. But I can't think of anything that's not included. And I wouldn't encourage you to sort of seek or further items to include. A couple of direct questions. Are you able to complete all this work by the timetables we've set you?
Well, you haven't set a timetable. There is a timetable set by SIPA, but obviously that is completely dependent on the organisation directive. So the likelihood is you won't meet the deadline, but that's because.
But subject to that, your introductory comments were that.
Yes, we're doing the. Yes, our intention is that we will do all the work and then we will move on to the next piece of work. So we will have everything complete as much as we can, apart from specifically around those balances. So if so, I wasn't involved last year. My understanding is that if this was not an issue and there was another sector issue around the infrastructure, that this opinion would have been signed within the time. And if there was no, and equally we would be able to do 22, 23.
But ignoring that, we can get on with you and agree.
Yeah.
Second question is, could you just describe to me how you approach the audit of Grenville?
So it's changed year on year. So the issues in previous years would have been around how do you make disclosure when there's no value. So that was the initial assessments. Obviously, as we've gone on in subsequent years, we're now in a position where there is less risk from external audit perspective, because actually you're going to have a figure that is going to have you're going to have a provision. So actually, from our perspective, the risks around our conclusions are actually reduced every year once there is more certainty around the number that will exist. So we'll be just looking at the evidence that you provided around the provision, and then we'll obviously start to also think about whether you have any contingent assets you'll be considering as well, because you'll be seeking to recover funds as well. So that's the only other bit of changing. So we previously audited it in a different way this year. The 21-22 audit that is outstanding and we're waiting for, we'll look at the evidence that you have around it. We'll just look at that and we'll review it against the
Okay, and we as a committee have looked a number of years at not the number in the accounts, because there wasn't a number in the accounts, but the narrative which is given in the notes to the accounts, and it described the best read of the situation at present. with an eye to various constraints. Do you look at that probably?
Previously we have, so yes, that's something that we would have been quite careful about. There's a balancing act of understanding that when you're making the disclosure that you've got to comply with auditing standards against the thing that you don't want to give too much information on, this type of thing. So there's always a balance to be struck, and we're mindful of that. And in previous years, we've obviously signed off the audit. We've been satisfied that the amount of information that we disclose meets the level of what we would be comfortable with from the staff.
Okay. And when you come back, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, which is why we got it as a significant. So that's why we badged it as an area where we will be undertaking specific focus.
And I make the point because in other years, the reports have come, we've looked at it, and we've had some concerns about the adequacy of the disclosures. It's then gone away to be looked at after the committee meeting, and it's just not as good as addressing the issue committee meeting. So anyway, that's just it.
But hopefully, Andrew, hopefully we've got more information about the liability. You should be able to make a firmer comments.
Or you will be able to.
Or we'll be able to.
Yeah,
And
equally, there'll be something more tangible towards it rather than.
Yeah. Just to add, Chair, we've taken on board the committee's feedback previously. So on page 171 of the pack. No, 32.
Did you not get to 171?
No, 32 is the account contingent liability. We've significantly enhanced the word.
Right, no, I've read the word, but
Yeah.
it's then struck me, it's something I want to concentrate on this year, because of just some concerns.
Just to reassure you, we've had regular conversations with Grant Thornton over the period of that, of where we're at with the various alternative dispute resolution process, and they again be keeping them updated as we go along.
Okay, and then looking at the total audit fee, let's see, it's gone down. But there's special factors in. The top line has actually gone up because it's based on a scale rate that was agreed some time ago, which was before we were in our cost of living crisis. So what was the thinking behind the increase in the scale rates?
So that's not within our control.
So I'm just interested. So it's not a price increase.
The reason it's, so you're right. So the fees have gone up, apart from the fact that there have been examples. For example, you had a system implementation in the previous year where we had to do additional work that has meant that the fee has gone up. So the scale fees have changed, and that's because the scope of the audits since the contract was awarded has changed substantially. So there's different things that the regulators have required us to look at. For example, when this contract was agreed, the value for money work was completely different to what it is now.
Well,
so for example. So that's why the fee has gone down. I think you'll might be interested then to see what 23-24 looks like, because it's significantly larger. It's obviously competitive.
That's on the contract that was left.
That's the contract negotiation. Yeah.
So have I got an answer I can hang on to as to why £10,000 extra fee is being incurred on the underlying basic audit? You're saying an extension of scope.
So with the scale fee, what they've done, because it's a really complicated and convoluted process, but essentially the PSAA in previous years, rather than adjust the scale fee to reflect changes of scope, they've asked us to do variations. So you will have a scale fee, and then we will have all these numbers like the fee variation related to PPE and pensions. Those things will have to be agreed on top of that. Then as they've gone along each year, PSAA then will bake in some of those variations. Okay, rather than have that separately approved, we'll include that within the scale fee for that year. So the numbers will reconcile. So there will be between the 93 and the 109 that you're referencing. That's why we've tried to show it in a table to show that there are movements down, but it's a complicated process to get to. Obviously now with the new contract 23-24, that will be completely rebased. So all these things disappear in terms of variations. So there will just be a scale fee.
And then last question, as you phrased it, when will we get to consider 23, 24. What's our contract with you? It's how many years?
So you don't have a contract specifically with Grant Thornton, you have a contract with the PSA.
Yeah, when did we last do it? Because I wanted just to keep in mind, need to spend enough time and critically review that renewal of the contract. Last time.
So you've signed up and you've agreed to be part of that contract already. So that was done previously. So the PSAA will publish the scale fees for bodies. Technically speaking, they were meant to do it at the start of that year. So it would normally be it would be before April 1st, 23. But because the new contract was let, I think their commitment is to do so in October or November. So that's when they.
Yeah, so I'm fair to actually ask you this, but the question is really to my colleagues.
That's already happened.
Is that we had a discussion about reappointment of auditors 2-3 years ago. Mike, I'm looking at you because you knew I raised the point. I think we were going with sort of 99.
Yes,
and I just put the marker down that yes, agree with it, but how many years it was, 4 or 5 years. I was just trying to be reminded when it comes up again to look at future audit arrangements. It's not. I know it's not this year.
Yeah, it's sometime in the.
Yeah, there was a paper in March. I did
Yeah,
attend, but I can see for the minutes there's a paper in March.
We've already brought the fees here, and we've agreed them for I think it's a 5-year contract, as you say, starting with 23-24, so it'll be till 28, 29.
The 23-24 is the first year of the new fees and
Grant Thornton have been reappointed for us, which we're actually pleased about. I'll say that. Partly because I think my understanding is that they have a better record on completing the audit. Certainly has been the case here. Our audit would have been completed, I think, probably one of the first in the country if it wasn't for the
which is very good. Yeah,
so we're pleased they've been reappointed, but the fees are higher for all the audit firms under the new audit arrangements, and I think that reflects the fact that many authorities have had a lot of problems getting the audits done because, from the point of view of the audit firms, the fees are not high enough for the amount of work that there is to do in terms of going through the accounts. It's the only proof we have of that, in a sense, is the outcome of the PSAA, the outcome of the process, which had those higher fees, but they were across the board. They weren't just for Grant Thornton, and they were for.
So my understanding is we agreed to go with the PSAA, and almost by agreeing to go with that, we agreed to go with the fees because they were negotiated by then. So I don't, and if you're saying now that is the fee and there aren't other bits going to be added on as in previous
change of scopes, but yes,
then I don't know what latitude we have for discussion.
Well, there isn't.
Andrew's obviously City of London. I think are the only authority who.
I think nationally, Chair, 98% of local authorities have opted into the scheme. So just to benefit of the new members in the room, the public sector audit appointments body every 5 years procures the external audit contracts for local authorities in the UK. They award contracts on the basis of that tender exercise nationally, so we don't have to do it ourselves. They allocate them to regions and authorities, the external auditor who you will have. There's some limited opportunities to object if you're really not happy, but they also set scale fees depending on the size and nature of authorities as well, which then also comes to the committee, external auditor and their plan. But Andrew's right, actually then beyond that, apart from the contract management that PSAA carry out, actually limited scope into fees or anything.
So I'm not going to leave it at that, but I think an eye on the fees is important, and we need to do that. Any other questions on the plan for Paul, Councillor Gardner?
Can you just remind me, page 56, performance materiality? What is performance materiality?
That's something that the auditor uses. So we have a headline materiality that we work through the report to, and then we apply a lower performance materiality, which basically we use that to try and then to mitigate the risk around cumulative. Yes, 7.9 million. So basically, we use that as a figure within our work to mitigate against the risk of cumulative unadjusted misstatements or lots of different errors that might add up in total and become material. So we wouldn't really need to report that figure to you. The key figure is the headline bit, but we report that to give you assurance that we're not just looking at every number above 11.3 million. We do our work to, that's the level we report to, and that's the materiality figure that will impact our opinion. But we do work to lower levels. We test lower balances, which is what, for example, the trivial matter is that 565. So if we identified anything above that amount, we would communicate that to you in our audit findings report.
So using the word performance isn't the council. It's your working.
It's actually,
Yeah.
all corporates
Yeah.
have materiality financial statements and performance materiality and trivial matters. It is, if you look at any audited accounts, that those are materialities that are disclosed.
Just check, can I ask, you mentioned capitalisation direction, and I think you referred back to the fact that it was going to, and I was going to raise this subsequently, but you mentioned that it would impact 21-22 account. I don't understand, because the capitalisation request was made in January 23, therefore no borrowing has been made granted. So I don't understand why it's even going to affect the 22-23 accounts, let alone the 21-22.
Because the accounts were open and they were open because of another matter, which was a national matter to do with the valuation of assets. That meant that we had, because during that period that the accounts were open, we became more able to give an estimate of the amount that will be due. We have to change the accounts and move to having a provision rather than having a contingent liability. So we now have to put a figure in because we were aware of the figure.
So you'll have a note that will be called post balance sheet events. Well, basically they can either be adjusted or non-adjusted under the standards. And this is something that your own assessment, but obviously ours as well, is that you would consider this an adjusting post balance sheet event. So you will make change within the accounts, and you would explain that normally in the last vote or near the end.
So if you're saying we say X million, then you're then looking to essentially balance it on the other side by saying hence the capitalisation direction. So at what stage, if we don't get capitalisation direction, this sits forever and a day unless so the accounts remain open, unless, because we can put one note in, but we can't put in the balancing side of that equation until or unless we get an approval for capitalisation direction or an alternative.
Well, we either get the capitalisation direction or we don't, and that will happen slowly as I feel they're going. That will happen, I would think, in the next 3 months, and I think we will. I'm reasonably confident we will get the capitalisation direction, and then the accounts will be amended to take account of that we're paying through borrowing and use capital receipts. If we don't get it, we'd have to finance it a different way, as you say, on the other sides of the accounts. But
so
that's why we need to know, because
And are you
the actual
confident?
borrowing won't happen until 24, 23, 24.
yes, the actual borrowing is.
You're confident we'll get that directive in order to get to these accounts by September, so that we can actually close these? Because we're getting this multiplier effect now, aren't we? Because we can't close that year, we can't close that year. Now, I appreciate that we know the reasons for that, and the reasons are well recorded. So it doesn't alarm me, but it's just frustrating that we can't get these things done.
I mean, you're still in a far better position than a lot of other businesses that don't even have a specific issue like this. So there's only one London borough that's got 21, 22 accounts signed. I'm not aware, apart from a couple others that we're starting for 22, 23. I doubt any other of the that have been done by other firms, and none of those will be started now. 22-23. So it's obviously a bit frustrating. You want to get them closed out because you're still running the risk. You've got set of accounts that are open, and you know, if we hadn't done it, the difference is we've done all the work other than this. But if we hadn't done anything, then the risk is obviously that you've got figures where you're making decisions going forward around budgets and things. That you might be making those decisions based on figures that have not been audited and could be wrong. That's always the risk of having is open mitigation for you, is that we've done the work.
Yeah, and I'm confident in the work that's been done and that everything is in order, but it's still frustrating.
It's frustrating.
And it seems to me that local government has this amazing ability of taking something that seems to be relatively straightforward and completely confusing it. How we can talk about 60 or 7% of local authorities not having their accounts signed off for 2 or 3 years back. But anyway, that's a whole different.
Very disappointing for Hina and Lubna who did the accounting.
Yeah.
We are.
I mean, we've done our
We-
bit.
we-
and
Play ahead actually of most local authorities, because as Paul said, many local authorities and without issue are behind. So it is very frustrating that the really the slowness in responding to the capital punishment is now what's slowing us down. It really is just sounds fun. But
Okay, I'm going to bring this item on the agenda to a close. And just as a committee, happy to note the plan. I think we've heard some issues around it. And I'd like also again to thank the finance team here for the hard work we've done to get these accounts in on time and make it straightforward, hopefully, for the auditors to do their work. And we've heard we're ahead of most of the local authorities, so well done to the team for doing that. Well done. So now can we move on to item A7, the Treasury Outturn Report. Patrick, you've waited for an hour and a half. Go for it, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. So you're all quite familiar with this report. We used to bring it quarterly, bring it to us a year now. This report is for the full year, the Treasury Outturn Report. And I'm just going to pick out a couple of key points and then I'll open up the questions. So one thing to note is that the outturn figures against the budget were favourable. So we've generated more interest receivables throughout the year than we expected, which is good news. We actually ended up paying slightly less interest than we expected as well. So those are positives that we always like to hear. There's kind of breakdown there of your borrowing, which hasn't changed significantly. There were some loans repaid in year, which reduced the borrowing and the average rate of borrowing. And then the cash reserves steadily kind of declined. You can see the comparison there year on year, and closed the end of the year at 45 million. Just to give some context, because obviously time passed on since the end of March, those reserves are at about 70.5 million currently, with 38 million in very liquid assets, money market funds. So cash flows are manageable at the moment. In terms of kind of economic update, every time we come, we say we hope interest rates have peaked and they'll start to drop off. And every time it's almost amusing. But as we know, 5% is where the bank rate is, and Link is now forecasting 5.5 as the peak. However, there's suggestions from the market that might go as high as 6.5%. The impact of that on cost of carry is obviously the same for short-term borrowing, because as borrowing costs increase, so does the yield on the investments as you're holding them. So in terms of cost of carry, it's not the worst news, but in terms of having to potentially borrow over the short term, it does mean that borrowing costs increase. But certainly within that context, the idea would very much be to borrow short term and stick in line with what Link, our advisor, is suggesting, and what the general sentiment is in that over the medium term, rates will come back down and we'll be able to refinance at that point in time for more favourable rates. I think just to
How risky is that?
how risky is that as a strategy? Well, the risk is obviously that rates continue going up, and at the point that we need to borrow, we've sort of missed out on potentially locking in some slightly lower rates. The rates that we would typically be able to borrow at are gilts plus 80 basis points. So whilst bank rate might influence that, it's not the deciding factor. So it kind of depends a little bit on the gilt market to some extent. And considering cost of carry as well, which is kind of the worst outcome with borrowing, locking in money, and then not having utilised that because of yields increasing alongside of rates. It means that the cost of carry typically stays staggered in line with that. So yes, it's risky, but we have to sort of go with the advice of the advisor, try and stick in line somewhat with market forecasts, and that still is that rates will over the medium term come back down, sort of starting towards the end of next year. And you know, if we can get through and stagger our borrowing so that we only borrow as much as we need to manage our cash flow throughout that period, we can minimize the risk. We can try and take small amounts at different periods of time and spread that risk accordingly. And with a view of that all being short term, the option of refinancing when more favourable options do arise. We also do have the preferable HRA borrowing rate at the moment, which is gilts plus 40. That's a considerable discount on your certainty rate even. And we are sort of considering how we might utilise that to our advantage as well. Again, if we can manage our cash flow throughout, which our sort of cash flow projections suggest we can get through a number of months more this year. You know, there's chance. It's inflation through sticky. Bank of England has to show that it's willing to take the bite of inflation. But hopefully rates become more favourable, gilt yields stabilise a little bit and reduce, at which point we can leverage that HRA preferential rate and look at strategic options for utilising that through internal borrowing within the general fund as well. And that's the strategy that we would go with. So yes, risk, but if we sort of spread small amounts over the period of time that our cash flow projections suggest we need to, I think we can manage that risk and reduce the impact of it. I think just to comment on the short-dated bond fund, the Royal London, which you'll note is still showing an unrealized loss, which obviously is not great news. However, within the context of the cycle and the reason for holding this instrument, the point of diversification and being able to stay in the market and take opportunities over a longer period of time than we would typically do with our treasury investments we're utilising ourselves. So on the VNAV fund, you've got an average duration of 2.84 years. We wouldn't invest ourselves to something beyond 12 months typically. So that gives us an opportunity to try and maximise slightly longer opportunities over that duration, which becomes favourable now that rates are high, Anything maturing at the moment will be then reinvested within the bond fund at yields paying. Some of them that they're reinvesting into now are 6.5%, and the average yield on that fund is 4%. So actually, whilst there's the unrealized loss, we plan to hold this for the long enough term that all of those bonds that were entered into, purchased at the sort of start of last year before this rapid rate rise cycle, they should mature, and then obviously the loss on the paper loss on those is sort of washed out of the fund. And as rates drop off, you've got those that you're locking in now at 6.5%. So we should see a correction on that, but it will be one that we sort of see play out. But the yield on it is positive, and we are getting a good yield on that investment now. So I think that's what I wanted to say there.
You're under this, you're itching to come in on that. Any questions you'd like to ask?
I don't know. I just really had a concern about, the cash investments going right down. They're suddenly going right up in interest and completely outweighed by the fixed rate borrowing. And it just, I know we're sort of looking long term, we're going to change that strategy as we go, but when I just looked at this, I thought, why? We're getting 4% on our cash investments, paying 3.32 on our fixed rate borrowing. Yet we've reduced our cash investments. So why did we do that?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, we wouldn't have reduced our cash investments. That's the result of positive news. Spend on the capital program going better than planned. So there was.
I thought we'd underspent on the capital.
Perhaps I don't know what the outturn is.
To spend, but not as much.
Exactly.
Not as much as we predicted. Yeah.
There are a number of payments related to Grenfell as well, which haven't been covered through borrowing. Again, that's positive in the sense that we haven't had to take borrowing out at a higher rate than the yield we would get. So utilising those cash reserves in that respect. And then the day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month cash flow activities that occur. But we have seen somewhat unexpected cash receipts coming in. So like I said, that we've got that 70 million now in the cash reserves, which is generating the yield. And that is kind of the explanation for that.
But I think essentially it comes down to what Patrick said before, though, that the borrowing now is at a higher rate than we can get in terms of the investment. So we've in effect used our balances, used our to fund our expenditure rather than borrowing more money because the rate is higher. We can't get that lower rate that we had historically. It's no longer available.
Okay, any other questions from members of the committee?
Only that I've heard this tale on the investment grade bonds in different types of assets. You buy something, it goes the wrong way in the short term thing, in the long term, it morphs really. So at what stage do we actually sort of really pull back and check whether we should? We've got an approved strategy, I understand that, describe the strategy, but we're sitting on something that's underwater. Okay. Of course, there's an option to hold until it gets better. There is also another option to get out of it. And I don't know what triggers that. You also got strategies looked at annually, is it, by council?
I was going to ask that, because we need to look at it forward, because it's a fast moving environment.
We look at it all the time, really. I mean, we're looking at it regularly. So if we were advised to get out, we would do that. But we're advised to hold at the moment, and obviously it would become a realised loss if we came.
No, I understand. It's a judgment, but I think I asked at one committee, where is treasury strategy in subsequent to the meeting. It was confirmed that the strategy being prepared. How often does that strategy get looked at? Is it an annual thing, or is it every 3 years, or
Annual.
so it's coming up again March?
Yes, we'll start writing the 24-25 strategy in November time, and that will be approved February full council to then be in place for and that's
It's not done as part of the budget, it's done, so it's the March
But
meeting.
we can make tactical decisions at any time. I mean, that's the strategy.
Yeah.
But a decision about whether to come out of the bonds and use deploy the money in a way, which we could make as officers within the confines of the. So the strategy gives us the permission to invest in the bonds, but it doesn't mean we have to. We don't have to wait a year to.
Okay, so you don't have to wait a year. It is reviewed regularly.
Yeah.
And it's not for this committee to determine whether the strategy is right or wrong, but there's a process to.
There's an annual strategy and it's reviewed regularly.
I have regular meetings with Arlene Close, a meeting with them on Friday.
Okay,
And
right.
I'm
I'm sure there's a process.
I took them to town on it as well to just fully understand what it is they're saying and why they're still confident in the fund. And they gave that same explanation, which is that over the medium term, these underlying assets will mature. The sort of paper write down on them will wash out of the fund.
Okay, we've raised the point, and we'll come back to it.
Yes.
Thank you, and come again.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question on other local authorities. I think this is bullet 9.1 on page 93. My question was about, given what we've heard from Mike about other councils being in financial difficulty, what do we look at and what are the credit risk ratings on the North Lancashire Council on page 98 to put money in? And can you just tell me a bit more about how you deploy money to other councils, given that there are a lot of them who are in financial difficulty?
Yes, absolutely. That's a good question. Arlene Close have a list of counterparties who are approved and recommended, and local authorities sit within that. There's a small list of local authorities who aren't on that approved list, but that's generally the exception, given that local authorities have never defaulted on their loans from other councils and are typically regarded as very high quality credit, given that they have tax raising powers. You wouldn't necessarily have a credit rating as a local authority unless you were going out to the market issuing an instrument. So we wouldn't necessarily look at a AAA or something like that, but we do have a fairly drawn out due diligence process, which requires looking at their accounts, their long-term financial strategy, their outturn, their level of reserves. And we take a number of health readings from those different reported papers, balance sheet, to determine if they meet certain thresholds. And then we look in the news as well, in case there's anything reported on those regarding financial or potential reputational risk also. And then the drug director, Phil, would give sign off after that. As that analysis has been done and a recommendation has been made.
One more question, Councillor Gardner, did you have a question?
There was actually a question for Mike Curtis. I think Andrew Lynn was asked before about why did, but I don't think you were at the meeting, and I thought maybe you could help inform us. Why did we go into the investment grade bonds, given that we hadn't done before? Why did we pick last year to do so?
It was simply to diversify and to try and get higher rates, because higher rates were not at the time were achievable, but through that instrument. But obviously, the rapid rise in interest rates that's now happened means that hasn't. I mean, you wouldn't do it with hindsight, but yeah, the timing has worked against us on that.
But just to add to that point, if I may, the sort of unrealized losses as a result of the duration. So we were locking into longer loans, to longer bonds in order to get that higher rate, which impacts us now. But at the tail end, when rates drop off in your liquid markets, we'll still benefit from bonds which are being purchased now. So it does go both ways, and that's the diversifying benefit from it.
Thank you. Okay, so committee paragraph 2.1. We're going to recommend to the leadership team refer this report to full council.
Yeah.
Okay, we're happy with that. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that, Patrick. I'm always impressed with the way you can recall decisions and account for them in detail. So thank you. Very good.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Can we move now to item number 8, please? The draft annual statement of accounts and annual governance statement. Members are asked to note the 22-23 draft statement of accounts, which is authorised for publication by the Executive Director of Resources on the 31st of May 2023. Lisa, you're going to present that.
Thank you, Chair. So I think you've already touched a little bit on this report in Paul's item tonight, but I'll just give you a bit of background. So really pleased to the draft accounts 2 years. Tonight they were completed by the statutory deadline of the 31st of May, and that's all credit for the team who did that work. I think we were about 1 in 4 London boroughs achieved that deadline, so that's a really, really good achievement. They were published on our website on the 31st of May. They were there for public inspection between the 1st of June and the 12th of July. That period has now ended. As Paul has said, the external audit is underway. That started at the beginning of July. We are working through that with the auditors now with a view to bringing back, subject to the capitalisation direction that we talked about, the audited accounts by the end of September to the meeting that's in the diary. Then, as Paul said, we'll bring back the work they've done there, even if the capitalisation direction remains outstanding. So this evening, I've got the team here who can answer any questions on detail. I know you had a presentation last week on the detailing the accounts, and you've answered some questions subsequently to that as well. If you've got any further questions tonight, happy to.
And not all members are on that briefing. So, any questions for Lisa, please?
I've got maybe the best thing is I just give you this. I've just got picky little sort of round, and I'll just give you repeated sort of comments on the accounts. Okay, that may help. I've just got 2 queries. Doubtful debt provision is about 32%. That strikes me as very high. And the other thing is there's been a very large increase in the pension asset. Now, I think that was explained in the presentation on 30, which unfortunately I couldn't make because I had another board meeting. But it's an increase over 5 times. Is that comparable to other local authorities? Because I was thought having the same thing. And also, it's also noted as a matter of uncertainty. And that it is something that concerns me because it's a large increase. So I'm sorry I couldn't make it.
On the doubtful debt provision, compared to the previous year, because it was
High last year as well.
it was high last year, so it's
But not
based
as
on the
but it's going up and up and up.
Yeah, so we do calculations, we look at the debts, we look at the probability of those debts and how likely we are to collect them. So we do include things like living prices of like that are happening or likely to have a natural impact on our collectability. So which is why those would have gone up slightly, although not as being affected by the cost of living.
All years it's a third of your debtors. So what controls are in place over the debtors if we've got, when we're allowing these debtors to accrue and then we're having to provide for a third of them.
So we do work on debt collection and closing debts, and we have an analysis of what number is made up of as well. Some of it we just finding issues will materialise, but as Sheena said, we do that review of where we think we are and when those debts will or will not pay. So we may have been overly prudent in that figure, but that's what we felt at the time of compiling these accounts. 32%. And I think a large part of them, if you look at the individual details, things like parking, which are quite close to the debt figure, and local taxation, that would be a collection fund and our auditors will obviously review that as part of their work to give us assurance or not on the fact that
As a percentage, the debtor balance is quite high, isn't it? But as said, there can be an element of timing, but balance is high, but the actual ECL is a percentage. So to me, just looking at the figures without auditing them doesn't look unreasonable. I mean, I would expect things like parking to be higher, and I would expect trade receivables, which are, for example, things that you would transactions that you would go into within that you would make a decision to make, you would expect that to be lower, where parking and obviously local taxation, they're things where you're essentially providing a service where there's no, that you've got less, I mean, because you're collecting the money, and if people don't pay, it's not like you've provided that you can hold the service back. So unreasonable, but it's something that we look at. It's obviously material, so we do work around it.
Can we make a note to look at that when we get the audit report and see how it's in the funds of the whole account, how it's panned out? And if it is looking very high, it's something maybe we need to have an item on the agenda at a future date. Thank you. Any other observations or questions on the accounts, Councillor Gordon?
Thank you.
Yeah, I believe it's the highest in the country, or off the top of my head, I think it's the highest.
Okay.
So it's 108, I think it's 182%, I think, of your. So that's the highest, but I would say there are probably only 3 or 4 OGPS now that are below 100%. So your movement, you're coming from already being one of the highest to continue to. So your increase is similar to what others in the sector have experienced, and it then provides a very strange scenario where the auditor focuses a lot on pension liabilities, and now we're talking about assets and actually whether or not you're allowed to recognise all of it. So we're coming into uncharted territory in terms of certain standards where we would never expect an asset like that. So we've asked a specific question around standards and the appropriateness of that balance, and it's a sector-wide issue. So people might not have the same value elsewhere, but movement is certainly consistent.
You highlight that as well going forward.
Well, it's a significant risk in our account. So obviously it's a big number and there's a lot of estimation. So we do quite a bit of work around it.
Thank you. Councillor Gardner.
Very much concerned about the pension. My worry is that next year, or the next valuation, it goes the other way, and as a result, we suddenly have a massive underpayment. So I just really concerned that this isn't just a once only issue, and then next time around it reverts. My questions were as regards the page 117, 13 of the draft accounts. The fact that we now have a contingency and we have creation of contingency reserve. And this is when I was looking at the 20, then the notes to the moving reserves. I myself looking at reserves. So I know page 7 when we talk about project stabilisation and contingency. Really don't understand the creation of contingency reserve and who decides what goes into which reserve pot. And then there's a budgetary reserve and stabilisation. And actually when you read something, then because if they're the same with just a different heading to a different pot. And then also
Should we just get an answer to that one?
Yeah, so thank you. So I'll start with it. Well, so we in the past, we've must have had a contingency budget of over £5 million, which you can see from there. We did reduce that budget from 23-24 to £3.7 million. We weren't spending all of the contingency. And in fact, what happens at the end of the year we just passed, we actually got the contingency through, we didn't spend the contingency. But what we've decided to do is to roll it forward as a reserve rather than wrapping it up in any of the other reserves. And actually, for future years, 24, 25, we won't make a contribution for contingency. We'll use that reserve instead. So if you look at the medium-term financial strategy report that we presented to leadership last week, there's a best and a worst case scenario in that report, and it talks about best cases. We can continue to keep that contingency reserve for slightly longer than the worst case. So it's about planning and trying to ring fence that contingency for future contingency.
So in the future, if necessarily going to be topped up because there will be no contingency. You'll just be dipping into a contingency reserve, but you won't have a new budget done.
We'll make a decision in the future once we've started to use that reserve to create a budget again, depending on how we utilise it. It's just giving us a little bit of flexibility around. So you'll keep a close eye on that report. Yeah,
and how does
we monitor
contingency reserve fitting with the, I think it's called budget stabilisation, budget carry forward, budget stabilisation the previous year? Very different.
Well, I think they're long. The budget stabilisation is longer term, really. In that it's for stabilising the budget from changes in funding and so forth. So the contingency reserve, the reason for that is really what Lisa outlined, but the reasoning behind it is that it's actually a bit difficult that we had a £5 million contingency and we didn't use any of it in year. So you end up with quite a big underspend, but it's not an underspend on services, it's an underspend on something you wouldn't want to spend it. I mean, obviously it's a good outcome that we didn't spend the contingency, but I'm concerned that having a big underspend doesn't look very good, and it means that the rest of the budget, it sort of distorts the rest of the budget planning. So using it as a reserve just seems a way to avoid that happening in future, that it's sat there as a reserve, but it is there for the year, and we will have a contingency reserve that certainly won't be above 5 million, but it's there for that year, and then if we don't use it, we roll it forward and don't have to top it up. If we do use it, we will have to top it up. So it's
holding in reserves is just as accessible as holding it.
Yeah, so we've said it is we've said it's for that purpose. The budget stabilisation reserve, I mean, we could use that. We could use that in year if we had to, but that's not the intention of that. Really, is to use that as part of the budget planning process. If, for instance, the government reduced our funding, we would be able to use, which there's always a risk of, because of the census results, because of they're always talking about fair funding and moving money out of London and reforming the funding system. We'd be able to use the stabilisation reserve for that.
Just a good thing to have, isn't it?
Yeah.
Size of balance sheet, complexity of the organisation. It's good to have.
That's
Okay, folks.
last year in the notes on note 19, so page 155, you talked about the shares posted across other local authorities, but that's not in this year's notes. Should it be? At the bottom page 155, to see, but isn't that note related to? I read that notice relating to last year's. Where have I got it wrong?
I think it is. It does relate to last year, 1, 2, because you've got it. page 155 is 21-22, not 22-23. Because 22-23 is page 150.
It's actually a separate heading, but if you read it, it says the following after the form employed was. There's the capital 123,642.
I think.
And there's 113 of these 21-22. So
we could just make it clear that,
yeah,
that's it.
yeah.
And then my last significant question, Making House has had a lot of work done to it, and yet it's still reflected as the same base cost. And I queried, could that be the case seeing it's reopened and it had a tremendous amount of money? So I just queried whether it's right that there was no change in the asset value.
Have to check and see if they have been revalued or what they've done in terms of the valuation. Come back to you on that.
Thank you very much. Okay, so the committee has requested to note the contents of the 22-23 draft statements of accounts. Does the committee know that? Thank you. And the audit accounts will be presented for approval of the audit and control committee in September, and at the end of the meeting will fix the date.
Yes.
So can we now then move to item number 9, please? Forward programme and action packet. You will have seen this. David, do you want to comment on it, or
So, as we've done in the past, Chair, we've obviously moved on items that were completed in the last meeting. Obviously, there's been a short period between the last meeting and this one. There's work for us to get some of the actions done before this. None of them relate to the rental extension nothing piece, which is the way I'm sharing a note with independent members earlier, and we'll discuss later this week in terms of just clarifying the testing we've done to ensure we come back in September with that final report. Taking another question.
any comments from the committee on any of the items on that tracker?
116.
That's helpful.
Okay. That's the case, then we are asked to review it. That's it, information. No decisions, no noting, just for information. Okay,
So is it, have we looked at the forward programme? You know, I was just thinking the forward programme, our Grenville expenditure assurance mapping exercise on the.
So I've sent you a document earlier, Andrew.
I've seen an email today, but I just want.
And there will be a report on the same.
So it should go on the.
And what? So we're going to have a chat.
We'll have a chat.
Yeah.
We'll get to review the work partway through,
Right.
then we'll come with the report.
Okay.
So the point Andrew's making is it needs to appear on this.
That's all.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to comment. Thank you for putting the asterisk for items that are mandatory and ones that are good practice. Ones that don't have any points on what are they, then if they're neither good practice nor mandatory.
I suppose when we say good practice, what we've done there, and I think Callum, if you sent round to the members of the committee separately, we put a table as to which bits of good practice specifically relate to. We can do, yeah. But the intent of other items are matters that have come to the committee to help it to really satisfy its terms of reference. Things like the risk strategy, the risk register, and so on. And that I suppose you would say in the comments they were good practice, but they're not sort of set out in codes that we've referred to for the other items. Please make sure it's there.
Thank you. Okay, so that report is seen and is commented on it. So, Paul, thank you very much for joining us this evening, and you've got your work ahead of you. Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody, for the reports. That is the end of our meeting today. Thank you.
Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Don't go.